Recap show. It's time for the recap show. Recap show. Recap show. All the things you didn't want to know. Recap show. Recap show. It is time for us to go. Recap show. Recap show. I'm your host, and it's time to host. Huh? What? I ran out of juice in my rhyme scheme, you guys. Well, admittedly, the song was a little fast, right? I mean, that was quite a clip, but I mean, oh, words. That's the most simple, basic thing to rhyme. Snow, show, toe, blow, foe. I mean, now I've got a million of them now that the intro's over. Well, here we are. Welcome, everyone, to Disorganized Play. I'm going to talk about it's Farquaad and one other guy. No, that's not true. There are theoretically more of you, right? Sure. Everyone will start filing in and take their appointed places as they see that the stream is actually live. Look, there's 24 of you guys out there. All right, so enough with the inanities. Let's get down to the dirty biz of the recap show. So, for those of you who are new, on Tuesdays, I talk about prepping my D&D game. On Wednesdays, I go off to my friendly local game shop, FLGS. I run that game for a table of nerds as part of Adventures League, D&D Adventures League. And on Thursday, I come back and tell you how it went. So, this week, we took a slight detour from Storm King's Thunder, the main plot of the book, and played an expedition, a one-shot of DDAL 05-11, Forgotten Traditions, which is a rather beefy adventure that involves investigating I'm going to call it a museum, for lack of a better term. It really feels like it's a museum dedicated to the master runes that the giants invented in their pursuit of this new magic called rune magic. So that's the basic premise. Is the Hotun Shul is the name of the complex. It had been buried and lost to the ages. It turns out, Grimlocks got together and buried the place through some sort of weird seismic event, got buried in the mountains. And so this stone giant sort of gives you the quest. He's not the main quest giver, but he's sort of the primary interface to, go here and go to this cave and you'll find it. And as written, I'm not sure what the motivation is as written. You're given the quest by the seers to go and explore the place. I'm not sure what the giant ostensibly, I didn't read real closely into the introduction because I adapted it for my own campaign. So that's the Buzzaloonie. That's the basic premise. Is the party is sent to investigate this museum dedicated to the rune magic of the giants, the lost craft of forging runes, and it's a dungeon full of traps. That's the most succinct way I can put it. So, our party we were at the temple, the Oracle Temple in Storm King's Thunder. They had finished their investigation for the most part, and Jorgen said, well, get a good night's sleep because we got a long road ahead of us. Great. They left the Oracle's temple complex the next morning, hiked up into the mountains, and then I described how this weird, almost magical fog kind of hemmed them in, and when the fog cleared, they were walking into this clearing where this stone giant, Cryethilier or something like that, he has a complicated name, he was waiting for them, and he addressed Jorgen as the Prince of Frost, and the stones had told him that he would be coming, and the retinue needed to. So I changed the quest a little bit. The stone giant tells him that the complex has been breached, and it's up to Jorgen and his band of small folk to retrieve the master runes that are interred within this museum, so that King Hecaton can use them to reforge the Ordning. right? So I brought it back into the meta plot in a very direct and well, potentially uncomfortable way if anybody goes off and plays some expeditions that follow up on this idea of the master runes, though. But that was the mission. So it steps on the toes a little bit. The Zentrum have the secret mission of stealing the master runes, which feels really weird. The whole thing is set up where there's a giant museum, and it's assumed that the players will go and basically loot the place, which my players are so directly aligned with the interests of the giants that they had a real struggle of like, do we want to get greedy and money hungry and try and steal the gemstone eyes out of the statue, or maybe we should leave the fresco of King Anum alone, or Anum, the god of the giants. Maybe we should leave his, his holy, the friezes of holy dedication that were created in his honor. Maybe we should leave those alone. Didn't stop them from dicking around with stuff. So the short version of the recap is they accepted that mission. They entered the museum complex with Jorgen, the frost giant, in tow, and away they went. And we went through the whole complex. There's, I would say, about 11 rooms, maybe 12 rooms, plus a bunch of traps. Although several of the rooms just have visual descriptions. They did take one short rest. There's nothing to stop them from short resting in the dungeon, right? Like, there's no random encounters that are specifically called out. There's no time pressure, although there is the idea, well, maybe other creatures like drow and grimlocks are going to show up now that this place has been opened up, and they might attack you. So there's some different options there for putting some time pressure on, but it's not inherently baked into the scenario. So they explored the place. They set off a bunch of traps. They kept exploring. They set off a few more traps. They collected some runes. They fought a couple of Remorhazes, which gave them a secret mission from the Emerald Enclave. They collected the final set of runes, and as part of the secret mission for the Zentrum in this particular expedition, they fought a bunch of ogres and orogs. So that was the big final, essentially capstone battle, was the 6 of them plus Jorgen versus the 6, the 3 ogres and the 3 orogs. I probably could have just made it 6 Icespire ogres. So one thing, we'll talk about missed opportunities, right? So we'll talk about that in a minute. But that was their last combat encounter, and then they had a final encounter with sort of the guardian statue that wards over the place. But rather than that being a combat encounter, we were running out of time, so I turned it into more of a RP encounter where the statue says, you've learned forbidden knowledge gained by the giants, blah, blah, blah. What is your, hang on. You've gained forbidden knowledge that was created by the giants. What is your intent with this thing? And that was fine. Basically, it was kind of a fun, brief little role-playing encounter where everybody in the party said, I'm here to restore the ordning, and the giant statue, kind of put them in the palm of his hand and then levitated them up to out of the thing, right? Except for the one Zent thief fighter guy who was like, I want to help the giants, but also I stole a bunch of stuff out of this temple. So that was, that was a recurring theme for the night, was the stone giant that they met at the beginning of the evening sort of questioned them about being pure of heart and swearing to honor their word, etc. So that's the final encounter was just an RP encounter. As written, it's a giant combat encounter. And by all reviews on different corners of the internet, it is a viciously brutal combat encounter that can really pull the legs off of your party if you work at it. I mean, as written, the Guardian has legendary actions, has lair actions. There's a lot that can happen in that final room. So that's the recap of the session. Then when we left off, basically, Jorgen says, all right, the next thing we need to do is head to Svardborg and defeat my uncle who has usurped my father's throne and taken my rightful place as head of my Frost Giant clan. Like I haven't painted him as the head of all Frost Giants, but definitely one of the more powerful ones, right? So that's the recap of the session. Let's talk about some kind of a review of the adventure and some missed opportunities, right? So I'll talk about the things that I like about the adventure first, and then I'm going to talk about some things that I screwed up in the course of running it, that if I were to run it again, I would change and fix, right? So, some things that I like about this adventure. It's super long. It's 51 pages. And it gives you a lot of modular options in terms of, if you don't like this trap, great. Here's 3 more that you could plug in anywhere. If you don't like these traps, like it honestly has like a bunch of traps described, and then it has another 7 traps that you can plug in if you don't like it. On top of it, it says, all right, here's your 6 or 7 basic encounters. You don't like those? Great. Here's 5 more encounters that you can plug into this thing. So you could play this thing with different characters multiple times, and depending upon the DM, have a different experience every time. The layout is the same. The basic premise is the same. Of course, the treasure you're going to get is the same, but you might fight a completely different set of monsters depending upon what the DM has plugged in. So I liked that fact about it. There's a lot of material there. That's good. I didn't play it, as written straight up, so I'm not going to comment on how strong the premise is. It's basically a straight up dungeon crawl, and in probably like one of the most classic dungeon crawl ways that I can think of, right? Which is room, trap, trap, room, trap. There are... is there more than one role-playing encounter? There's one role-playing encounter that can appear in 2 different places. So I ended up, as written, that was a ghost. I ended up skipping that because we had just had an RP encounter with a ghost, and I'm like, no, that's 2 sessions back to back where they learn and quiz and interview, and giants pass on knowledge in the form of an ancient spirit, right? So I skipped that. I considered adapting it, so maybe he was some sort of spirit that was imbued into a golem or something like that. But honestly, we kind of dilly-dallied around for about an hour before we started the adventure. And one of the players was running late because of prior commitment. And so by the time we got started, we were we're an hour behind, and we just didn't have time to jerk around the with a role-playing encounter that didn't really have a huge payoff to it, right? There's a storyboard attached to it, but you have to spend 365 downtime in order to get it. Like, you would have to be a tier 3 character with a ton of expeditions under your belt to activate that thing. So it's a classic dungeon crawl for good or for ill. I like the fact that there's a bunch of modular stuff that you could put in or take out. I would probably err on the side of taking some stuff out. There were a few traps. There are a few traps that seemed obvious, if they made their rolls. And then you go, oh, well, there's a trap there up there. Obviously, there's a trap, so I'm going to set it off, keep in mind, it's okay for the players to discover traps. They like to go, well, we dodged a bullet there. They set off, the floor falls away, and the pit trap opens up, and the glyph of lightning shoots off and zorches everything in the pit, and now they have something else to deal with. They have an obstacle to deal with instead of having a trap sprung on them. So overall, I enjoyed it. The magic item that was included was it was redundant for our campaign. They had just found, so it has a opal of the fire. It has a fire opal in it, the opal of the Ildrune or whatever it is, and they already had one. And honestly, at the beginning of the session, everybody sort of looked at each other and was like, "Does anybody want this thing?" "No, I don't care." "Okay, well, guess what? If you don't fight the monster that has it, I'm not going to feel obligated to give it to you." So we skipped out that part of it. They got plenty of consumable things. They got some potions of superior healing and whatnot. So they should feel like they're not unhappy. Honestly, for me, the primary purpose of this thing was to juice out a bunch of XP so that going into the next chapter, everybody is level 8. Right? That's what we're looking for. That's fine. It was an enjoyable experience. There were times where it was a little one note, and there were times where the pressure wasn't really putting the screws to them. Like, they got beat up a bunch and then they took a short rest and it was fine. So that was something I didn't feel great about, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. So missed opportunities. The biggest missed opportunity for me was this set piece combat at the end where this guardian statue comes to life, and it's a custom creature that has all of these runes and special abilities and lair actions and legendary actions, and it's supposed to be this knockdown, drag out, epic brawl between the giant statue monster and the rest of the party. We didn't have time to run that as the fight that they were going to fight. I may pull that creature later and put it in something. I haven't decided what, but it may come back and show up. So that's something I was really disappointed that we didn't have time to do. What happened was they got into the combat with the ogres and the orogs, and that burned our 45 minutes of combat time that we had available to us toward the end of the session. I couldn't get into another 45-minute fight. The store was closing. So we bumped up against time pressure. In hindsight, I wish I would have just skipped that part of the mission and instead fast-forwarded them back to and had that drop knockdown drag-out fight. So that was something that was a missed opportunity that I really regret not being able to lay on the table and push them into, like see how it would play out, because I was curious. I think it might be better to bring it back because I did not 100% study up on all the abilities of the monster, so I might have run it kind of slipshod anyhow. So, rushed at the end of the game and not utilizing its full abilities, I don't know that we've gotten the full juice out of it the way that it has the potential to be a beefy, pulse-pounding encounter. So that was a missed opportunity. I felt like I could have done a better job of narrating the combat. It did sort of fall down to, okay, you hit for 23 points of damage, great, who's next? That, I remember thinking to myself last night, like, there's not a lot of evocative action happening here. We're sort of bouncing our way around the table, and because I'm trying to push everybody through this thing and get it done in the end of time, I'm not sort of putting the appropriate flavor flourishes onto these scenes to make them stick with the players in a more meaningful way. So that was another missed opportunity. And then I felt like there was a missed opportunity to raise the stakes and kind of put some time pressure on and give them some reasons not to short rest. If they had felt like something was breathing down their neck, or if they had felt like, so the classic thing that you could have done is taken a page from Hidden Shrine of Tomoe-chan, which is a tournament module from way back in the day in AD&D, and the ticking time clock that they introduced there is that there's a very low level poison gas that is, fills this complex. and if you can explore it, but each hour it's going to slowly start poisoning you. So if you spend 8 hours in this complex, if you can't get out in 8 hours, you're dead. Now, that might have just led them to explore for 7.5 hours and then head back to the beginning and climb their way up. But that would have been one option. Another option would have just been continued like earthquakes, right? So a common theme in this adventure is that the area is sort of geologically unstable and chunks of the roof fall down, stuff like that. I could have had regular tremors going through so that they would have been like, no, we're not going to spend an hour in here. The place is going to cave in. And then, after the final climactic combat, just as they escape, the whole place does close in on itself. And there's this sense of like accomplishment. So that's another missed opportunity. If I were to go back and run it again, I would introduce some sort of ticking time clock scenario so that they start using resources and burning stuff. And as it is, I'm beginning to feel like Jorgen is too much of a superpower, and he tends to save their bacon a little too much now at this point. So I'm going to have to start thinking about ways to let Jorgen take a break from the storyline. We're headed to Svardborg, so that's not going to happen until, assuming he defeats his uncle, then maybe he will be like, I have to attend to business here. I want you guys to go do this mission for me while I firm up my standing with my clan. So that's likely what's going to happen there. So those are the missed opportunities. Overall, I enjoyed it, and for your $4, you get a ton of ideas and in terms of traps and encounters. The map is well laid out. It's got a bunch of alternatives to it. The monster at the end is very intriguing. I would, like I said, I'm putting it in my hip pocket to try and drag out later. So that's worth. It was definitely like a good purchase. It was of the two expeditions that I bought to look at and possibly slot in for this game session. This was the best choice for my group, and I enjoyed the opportunities that it offered me, even if I didn't always take advantage of them. So that's missed opportunities. All right, so I want to just briefly talk about a concept or just something that I want to have a segment here entitled, Is Your D&D Game a Slice of Cold Pizza? Right? What does that even mean? I walked away from last night's session and I was not very satisfied with the game that I ran. I thought it was fine. I didn't think it was stellar. I didn't think it was bad. The players all had a good time. They did not complain about the lack of treasure. They were happy to get together and roll dice and have some fun, and it was fun to explore that complex, and it only took one, it only took one session to get through it, so it was self-contained. They got an interesting story award at the end of it, so they have something they can spend their downtime on if they want to. 2 of the party members can use their secret mission to increase their faction rank. So, there was nothing. It wasn't a bad game, right? Like, I've had bad games. This was not a bad game. It was not a great game. And for a moment there, I was kind of disappointed with myself and, feeling a little burnt out. Like, why didn't I work at this harder? Why didn't I kind of go the extra mile to make it a better game? Why didn't I, a lot of second guessing in terms of what quality of experience I was putting on. And I realized it was a fine game. It was a satisfying game. It wasn't a great game, but you know what? Sometimes that's okay. So the metaphor that I have for this is like last night's game for me was a slice of cold pizza. You eat it the next morning, it's satisfying, it's not fine cuisine, it's not magnificent, it's not the best thing in the world to have for breakfast, it's not even really healthy for you, but it's quick, It's satisfying, it does the job for what you need to do, and you can go about the rest of your day. So really my main message here is manage expectations for yourself, right? Admittedly, there's more pressure on me because I'm hosting a show about this and people are tuning in to, drink deeply from my experience or insight or whatever the case may be. But my point is, if everyone had fun on a basic level and it was a fine way to socialize and spend your Wednesday night or whatever your game session is, and everybody got experience and got a solid deliverable about the whole thing, and everybody got a little chance to shine and maybe have some fun role-playing moments or get that critical kill in the combat or whatever it was, then you're allowed to have, I don't want to call it a mediocre session, but a session that's just fine. You're allowed to have a game every once in a while that's just a slice of cold pizza. It's comfort food. It's satisfying. It's not going to be life-changing, but everybody walks away happy and goes about the rest of their business, and you can always set up for the next thing, right? So I think there's a tendency in geek culture and in our RPG community in particular to have this sort of like alpha nerd competition. Who's the definitive, like, coolest dungeon master? Who's, putting on the greatest game? Who's put together this awesome battle mat? Or you just look at, like, miniature porn of, like, here's an entire castle set up, and we got 30, hand-painted, 350 hand-painted miniatures, or we're all fighting on the battlements, and can you imagine going through this? Like, at some point, you can just flop your battle mat on the table and scribble on it with your dry erase marker and not even put the figures on the map and have a fine, perfectly fun game of Dungeons and Dragons. You don't have to break your back to hit it out of the park every time. I'm definitely guilty of striving to hit those heights as often as possible. Well, I want something cool to happen this session. It can be cool. It doesn't have to be mind-blowing every single time. It doesn't have to take you 7 hours to prep or an entire weekend to paint every time. So, you know what? You work hard. You're entitled to a slice of cold pizza every once in a while. I'm not saying go out and run a bad game. I'm just saying don't beat yourself up for running one that's perfectly average and satisfying. All right, so with that in mind, I said that I would dedicate some time to Q&A. It's been a while since, it was a week ago that I ran over half an hour answering one single question. So I'm going to try and field some questions today. If you guys have things that you want to talk about, friends in the chat or enemies in the chat, talking to you, fuckwad, then feel free to pop those things in the sidebar and we will take care of them. So I'm going to let that kind of percolate a little bit in the corner of my screen here. And if anybody has any questions or anything like that, let me know and I'll queue it up and take care of them. In the meantime, I do want to show you one other thing that I put together here, and that is not this, it is this. So if you guys go into the maps directory, here is a hand-drawn tracing of Svardborg that you can download. It's in the rest of the maps. It's titled Chapter 8, Svardborg unlabeled.gif. And the way I look at it is I'm going to use this because they have Jorgen with them, and Jorgen should be able to provide them with a layout of what Svardborg looks like. The other thing that it does is it gives them an idea of, okay, well, if we approach from this way, there's probably nobody who's going to see us. We can infiltrate the place a lot easier. So keep that in mind, that the purpose here is for them to do some tactical planning. And, you know, Jorgen knows what the different buildings, their function is. He doesn't know who's there. He doesn't know who, you know, who's in those buildings currently, right? So he's definitely not going to give that away. But that's out there. I did a tracing out of the book. You know, this is my field notes version of a map. I've got one version for myself that I can put all my write all the monsters on and make some notes on, and I got one version for the players that has far less detail, that just shows sort of what shows this, and then Jorgen has labeled what the different buildings are and stuff like that. So that's a little treat for you guys that I put together. So that's the buzz. I hope you enjoy that. We'll be coming back to that on Tuesday. All right. So Selden Arcays says, so I finally found a third player for my Dungeon World stream. Do I have any tips on bringing new PCs into an already running game? Well, I think the best way to do that would be to use Dungeon World's inherent system of bonds, right? So if you can use the bonds on their character sheet to establish some longer-term relationships, and they could be something as simple as like familial relationships. So he's one of the PC's brothers or uncle or cousin or whatever the case may be. Like, you know, if you want to have a father-son thing, that's for the players to decide. But I think that's something that you could explore while you're filling in the bonds. Like, it's important to have bonds between the party members. So don't feel like this is a responsibility that you yourself have to bear the burden of for coming up with how do we bring this person in. I would say it's far better to turn it over to the players and say, hey, so, you know, Anne is coming in with a new character. Her character's a dwarven barbarian. How do you guys think that you're going to know her character? What do you think the tie is there? Do you have a mentor in common? Is there a familial relationship? Is there an old rivalry? Were you formerly stationed at the same army outpost, or, you know, served in the King's Guard together? There's relationships aren't difficult to come up with. It's a matter of establishing them and bring them in. And then there's always a reason why they weren't there for the first adventure, right? Assuming that you're not necessarily, so if you're like deep dark into the depths of a dungeon and you're like, well, why would this guy show up? It's very easy. He was a prisoner and his gear's nearby. If you're out on the wilderness, trail, well, maybe he or she, whatever the character is, maybe they've been captured or broken down, their wagon's broken down, or they were out hunting and they fell into some sort of trap set by goblins, but the goblins abandoned it long ago, and they never came to check it, but he's got caught in the deadfall, whatever the case may be. So you can come up with a million reasons why that player is there. D&D is full of coincidences, but so is also every kind of fiction, from movies to books to whatever. It's like, oh, well, then he came across this guy. If it was in the beginning of the book, you might not think it's, super weird. Yeah, then they came across this guy, and then they became friends. And they came across this guy. It turns out it was his uncle. That's a little remarkable, but it's not far-fetched. So I would say start with the bonds. Make sure that those get established, and then workshop it with the rest of your players. This is not a decision that you yourself have to inflict upon them or show some mad flourish of creative genius. Oh, look at how deftly I did this. Like, they're players, they get it, they know, like, oh, there's a new player on board, great. Let's figure out a cool way for their player to be involved with our players. The only time that your players get mad about stuff like that is if it's somebody who's flighty, who's going to drop in and drop out, and then they get mad for investing all this time into world building the relationship between the two PCs, and then that PC that they get so excited about and so invested in doesn't ever show up again because the guy, flaked out of the game for whatever reason. So that's something that you should feel free and feel welcome to turn over to your players to help you come up with that reason. And Dungeon World especially engenders that type of collaborative world building. But I would encourage you, no matter what game it is, to let the players carry the load when it literally does not matter. They're not deciding who the big bad guy is. They're not deciding that the new PC actually worked for the villain and is going to know about intimate details about his plans and how his hideout is laid out. No, let him make up the order of the trapezoidal emerald and the secret aims of this covert group that exists to introduce an experiment with wild magic throughout the world. Great, fine, you got a cool new sorcerer guild that you can now exploit in your own world building. And maybe there's maybe the big bad guy has moles within that organization, etc. But don't be afraid to let the players have a little piece of your campaign. That's my preference. Forsaken says, how do you handle a situation where there's a stall with players who can't decide on a course of action? Like they come to a place where they have 3 choices. How do you resolve those stalls? I feel like I've taken that question before, but it is a common situation in RPGs. So you have a couple different options. Number 1, like, recognize the fact that it's your job as the dungeon master to present information and then let the players process it and deal with it in whatever way they want to wrangle that information into a decisive form of action or course of action, right? So the implication there is you present information, and then while they're wrangling with it, your job is to sit back and listen to what they're talking about. And if necessary, correct them on facts that their characters have observed that they got wrong. Okay? So now the reason I stress that is there's a difference between telling someone, you think that, between telling someone, well, if you're planning to go to the blacksmith, keep in mind that the blacksmith seems pretty shady and he's probably in league with the Zhentarim. Okay, that's your opinion. That's you putting some spin on what the players may or may not know. You're putting presumptions onto those players, right? It's an entirely different thing to say, okay, I want to point out, just FYI, Robert, your character did notice that the blacksmith was meeting with a guy with long, black, scraggly hair, and he had an eye patch over one eye, and he seemed to be fingering some sort of silver ring on his left hand, but you can't get a firm grip on what it was. But you thought you caught the glimpse of a Zhentarim tattoo creeping out from the collar of his shirt. Okay? You have just reinforced a fact that their character has observed. It has a similar effect, but you're letting the players make the decision about what's happening. Oh yeah, maybe that guy, that's right, we thought that guy was in league with the Zhentarim. I forgot about that. Maybe we shouldn't go see that guy. Maybe that's the guy who's been double crossing us. Oh, how are we going to deal with that, right? So part of it is I will selectively, if I need to, correct them on facts because they may have forgotten that guy. Hey, remember that black guy who was so helpful? That blacksmith guy, he was so helpful to us, and he offered to give us like free shoes and stuff like that. Why don't we give him the book for safekeeping? Oh, you don't want? No, like I know they don't want to do that, right? I'm not going to force that decision upon them, but I'm also going to remind them of key facts that their characters know that they, the players, have forgotten, right? Sometimes I will introduce facts that the characters should know that the players don't. So I will call for an intelligence history check or a religion check or just a plain straight up like intelligence check of like, okay, Arcana check is a classic one too. Of, you know what? You have heard of a type of ritual that is blood magic, which has been known to summon these demonic hellhounds to the prime material plane. You also remember something about the fact that they're vulnerable to silver for some reason. Something in their summoning makes them vulnerable to silver. Okay, so you can nudge them gently in that way too. I've talked about this a little bit in terms of you can also just straight up, like, you can call an end to the conversation. Okay, guys, you know what? Like, you need to make a decision so that we can move on. But in general, the way that I like to handle this thing is to sit back, correct them on mistaken facts that they're bandying about. I will sometimes run down, okay, you've got 3 courses of action. Let's look at what you know about these things. And maybe if I'm really desperate, I might say, your character, you're a fighter, you know that if you're going to set up a major ambush, that this place is a death trap. There's only one way in, one way out, and there's a balcony above the door. You could easily trap somebody in there. You have to be careful with that sort of stuff because that does feel railroady, that you're just like slapping them in the face with, you've got a bad idea. So I won't necessarily I won't often tell them straight up, this is a bad idea. You can also have an NPC speak up and go, yeah, I don't know, guys. What do you think about it? Now, I remember 10 years ago, there was a group of the Emerald Enclave who got it, they walked into that saloon and they started all kinds of trouble and they got slaughtered in there. So it takes a deft touch, but if they're kind of stalling out, I will bring the table into focus by restating facts, and then also, like, on a meta level, just framing what your options are. And if I'm playing Adventurers League, I will bust it down to, all right, 2 options have been proposed. You can either short rest here, or you can press on through the cavern and try and reach the giant encampment by sundown. Show of hands. I mean, in Adventurers League, I will straight up have people vote. And that's legit. You know what? It's Adventurers League. It's not a home game. We don't have hours to sit around and debate this. So, and sometimes I will give them a friendly nudge in terms of, okay, well, you guys have been sitting around and talking and planning this stuff for 15 or 20 minutes in the dungeon here. You could call for a random encounter if you need to bring focus to the table and get everybody like into something that's happening and kind of take a momentary break away from this. Or you can introduce an element that might shed more light on what their different options are. So there's a variety of different ways to handle it, but it all comes down to how deftly you decide to give them a nudge, because that's ultimately what needs to happen, right? There are players who will sit around and argue for an hour and a half about what the proper moral course of action is. That's not fun for everybody. And you can say, guys, I feel like we need to make a decision. I'm losing some people here. Some people are checking out. Like, let's focus. What do you want to do? You can put it to a vote, or review the options, or both, or whatever it is. So that is my advice on there. If you go back and watch some other episodes, honestly, I think last episode of Disorganized Play, I actually talked about that. So that's a very common problem. Creatine says, I'm just kidding you. I know. All right. Do you ever feel bad when players have great ideas and you don't reward them because of, quote, plot? I have reasons, but it still feels railroady. Well, When you don't reward them for a great idea. If you have an example, I would love to hear an example of something that your players came up with that you didn't let them get away with. As for me personally, I do feel bad when I deny those opportunities. However, I want to talk to you about a different way to handle that situation, okay? Because the most common reason that I, shoot down a player's great idea, and I want to talk about what I mean by shoot down in a minute here, but the most common reason that I don't fully accept a player's great idea is because I know something about the plot that doesn't jive with what their assumptions are, or because I feel like it's too overpowered and gives them too much of an advantage. Which is, that is legit. Your job as the Dungeon Master is to manage the challenge level that is placed before the PCs, and if they find a loophole that they continually exploit in order to offset whatever challenges you put in front of them, it's within your realm of authority. I don't want to say, well, it is to nerf it, right? In some way, shape, or form, if you so choose. Assuming that you don't do it capriciously. Players will not respond if it feels like you're just like taking it out on them because it's too good or whatever. Like, I find that good role players will go, I know it's a little chintzy that I got that sort of wounding, and we decided that it does a D8 instead of a D4, and I feel like it's a little overpowered, so I understand how you have to tone it down or retcon it or whatever, right? Like, good players will realize when they've got it too easy. But get back to the main point. Let's not see this as a binary situation where player comes up with a great idea and says, let's do this, and you go, that doesn't work. It's tempting to see a lot of the decisions that we encounter, particularly in traditional games like Dungeons and Dragons, as being binary options. Are you going to go left or right? Did you hit or miss? I would say my advice instead is to take their idea and then adapt it into circumstances that jive with what you know about the plot or what you've revealed about the plot, that jive with your determination of what's a fair level of challenge and what's a responsible level of power or a reasonable level of power for your party to have. So my advice on this is do not shoot them down, because that does feel bad. Like that feels bad for you and it feels bad for the players. They've come up with this great idea and then they get slapped on their, no, that doesn't work. Okay, that's not encouraging for them, not a fun experience for them. But if you say, okay, well, you're not able to rally an entire troupe of performers to show up and provide a distraction, but you do know that there's this very popular singer in town, and she owes your brother a favor, and you can talk to him, and with a little bit of cash, you can get her to put on a performance that might distract several of the major lieutenants in the mafia circle that's got your main plot underway. So find a way to, I'm going to go back to some improv philosophy here, but find a way to yes and them without having to fully, you're not obligated to 100% accept the proposition on the table. And in my personal view, when you're DMing, a far more useful technique is yes, but. Yes, you can do some of this, but there's a consequence or there's a potential complication. I won't say like, oh, okay, well, you hire this woman, but the mafia now knows that you're involved. I will say, you can hire this person, but her brother's a little bit of a blabbermouth. He might drop your name when he's talking about who's sponsoring this event. So I will definitely accept an idea, but then attach potential consequences or potential complications onto that idea, which I'm empowered to decide whether I want to deploy them or not. So that way the player feels like I came up with a good idea. Oh yeah, then it makes sense that there's also some things that's going to have ripple effects. So that's something you have to, that's a technique you have to experiment with and get used to using. And it requires some improvisation in the moment of like, oh, okay, I can see how you would come up with that. And then I can see how this might get you into trouble. You know, playing Dungeon World is a great way to learn how to do that, because so many times success comes at a cost, and you have to determine, like, okay, well, he did hit him with the sword, his attack was successful, but then what bad thing happens as a result of that? And if every single time you go, oh yeah, you get hit back by the goblin, Dungeon World becomes very boring. If you challenge yourself to go, yeah, you hit the goblin, but you swing so hard that you chop into part of the supporting beam of the saloon here, and you can see the thing like dent and splinter, and there's a creaking groan from the balcony above. Okay, wow, that's a lot more interesting. So don't yes and their ideas. Don't feel like you're obligated to accept them. But instead, I would say embrace the kernel of their idea and then offer potential complications that could come up as a result of deploying this idea. So, yeah, I'm sorry, my Storm King's Thunder games are not actually streamed. They just run on a friendly local game store. Maybe that'll change in the near future. All right, so we got a few minutes left. So if you have other questions, Donovan says, yeah. No, I think that does address your question, Donovan. Is that I don't actually, none of these things these are run all at the game store, and they aren't recorded, and none of the players are saving throw people. So that's that buzz. So I want to go back to create cam that said an actual example. Recent example. The party was trapped underground. I presented a very small and almost impossible water-filled climb, a crevice. I tried to explain the difficulty, but they were determined. I let them climb up the crevice, and they were doing great, until a crit fail where they fell and got very hurt. It was a waste of time, since it didn't further the plot except creating an atmosphere of dread and the difficulty of the situation. Okay, well, I don't see how they had a great idea and you shot it down, right? What happened here was the dice shot it down. And that's something you're going to have to deal with at any time, and that's part of the game, and they know what they rolled. Now, you can always mitigate a circumstance like that, like if they're 180 feet up the crevice and one of them crit fails their roll, you could give, are they roped together? You can give the other players strength saving throws or athletics checks or dex saving throws to either grab on to a passing rock or to grab the rope and hold on to their friend who started to fall and keep them from dropping, hundreds of feet to the ground or whatever. And you can still inflict damage upon them and just say, well, that's the cost of the mental stress, the physical exertion of grabbing that, outcropping of rock and skidding along it and finally finding purchase, and your hands are bloody and, bit down to the knuckles because you're just clenching onto this outcropping of stone for your dear life. So there are ways to mitigate what seems like a certain death situation, right? That's definitely true. So keep that in mind. That's where you do have to improvise a little bit, unless, that's the point, is you're climbing this, potentially, if you're running a grim and gritty game where death is around every corner, then that's part of it. Like, they should be willing to like know that their character can die on a failure. The other thing that I want to point out about the way you described this is you said it was a waste of time since it didn't further the plot except creating an atmosphere of dread and revealing the difficulty of the situation. So don't fall into the trap of, unless a character is unconscious, there's no drama to the game. That it's only once a character gets knocked down to 0 hit points that you as the DM have proven a definitive advantage over the party. One of the things I talked about earlier was missed opportunities, and I felt like I wish I would have ground them down and then pushed them into like a combat situation without them taking a short risk. Because just slowly grinding off, 10 hit points there and 12 hit points there, and they have 3 of those encounters, and the next thing you know, they're down to 20 hit points, and they got to start looking at spending resources. So even though you're not tracking it on your side of the screen, most likely, when you inflict these pieces of damage and slowly work them over in terms of, you don't have to like issue a knockout blow and go, okay guys, the bard's down, now what are you going to do? I got you this time. No, if you can do 27 points of damage to the whole party just as a result of them climbing around trying to get from point A to B, you've raised the stakes, you've put them on alert, you've built suspense and dread. That's a valid storytelling and pacing technique that you should be deploying in your game. Now, if you tell them there's no way you can climb this thing and it's DC 25, that's not fun. And if they come up with a creative way to climb it anyhow, knock the DC down to 15 or whatever. They're still going to fail a bunch of the times. Excuse me, it's a little dry in here today. So, don't feel bad about presenting them with challenges which don't bodily threaten them. Not everything needs to be the pit fiend wielding his flaming whip and threatening all of the characters within an inch of their life. It's okay to raise suspense by chiseling away at them a little bit and then revealing, here's our set piece combat, what are you going to do? Okay? Keep in mind, players want opportunities to have input on how their characters respond to challenges. So if you are railroading them, there's no way to climb this thing, and guys, you got to keep going, they're going to feel like there's a lot of external pressure that isn't rewarding for them, that isn't satisfying for them. But if you've given them the choice, like, well, you can either take a short rest here, or you can make it to the giant encampment before nightfall, and they've just had 5 random encounters, over the past 5 nights that have been horrible and death-defying, and they know that the valley's filled with Yetis who are going to ambush them in the dark. At least they have a choice. Like, okay, well, we're low on resources, but we could press on, or we could stay here, fill up on resources, and tackle those Yetis that are sure to come tonight. So keep that in mind, that there's a lot of good advice in chat here today, that chiseling them down is definitely a valid way to keep them engaged in the game and to raise the stakes on the game. So yeah, a lot of great advice here today, you guys. We're about done with our session. So barring any final last-minute questions, I'm going to come back to your world here on Tuesday and talk about, well, I'm coming back on Monday. Monday is Monday Night Dungeon Fight, so let's keep that in mind. So yeah, glad to have a few moments here, half an hour today, where I could answer some of your questions. So Donovan 745, this will be the last one that I'll crack today. I don't have a hard out, but I don't like to let these things roll more than an hour. Ever done a game where players get to play in the afterlife and maybe gain access back to their life again? So I have not played Phoenix Dawn Command, but the great thing, it is a great premise. There's a game called Phoenix Dawn Command, which you can watch on our stream on Saturdays, where that's the very premise of the entire game, is that you are a hero who can be reincarnated 7 times, and each time that you are resurrected from the dead and take on a new life, you gain more power. Okay? And I think this is an ingenious premise for a game. I should probably just figure out a way to go and sit in on it a couple times, or at least once, do a guest spot on it and play it, because I just love the idea that you can choose when to sacrifice your character and give them that moment of drama where they make the ultimate sacrifice, and then they come back like Gandalf the White, more powerful than they were before, but at some point they're going to have to make that sacrifice again. So I have not run a game like that, but I would encourage you to check out our Phoenix Dawn Command game. The other thing that I have done, one of my favorite character concepts, was a cleric of Beshaba, but the character, we started at like 10th level or something like that. The character started off as a thief, and we just got to build the character 10th level, so this is what I decided for the backstory. This thief was a rogue and a scoundrel, and had run a bunch of scams against the mafia and you know, all sorts of stuff. But he had been highly successful scam artist, and he had banked a bunch of money and set up this contingency where if he ever got killed, he said, "Hey, you know what? Go to this vault. You'll find a 10,000 gold piece diamond. Take it to such and such chapel and have them cast resurrection on my body." Okay. So, at some point, of course, the forces that he had tinkered with caught up with him and had him assassinated, and he got a crossbow bolt right through the eye that went right through the back of his head and killed him, right? So his contingency plan kicks in, and at this point he decides, I spent too much of my life trying to screw people over and not paying homage to the gods of fate and misfortune, and he became a worshiper of Beshaba and gained a bunch of cleric levels, and it all like tied into like a multi-class or a prestige class concept that I had. But I love the idea, especially because in D&D death is so temporary, that he died, lost a couple levels, lost some power, like, you know, wiped out his life savings, lost a bunch of his equipment, and then was reborn into this whole new career. But he had this perspective of, I used to be this powerful thief. Those skills have been drained from me. Now I am a man of the cloth, preaching the words of the fickle fortunes of fate and, you know, ill fortune, ill luck, whatever you will. Then there we are. So I love that concept. I don't think it's explored enough in Dungeons and Dragons of, okay, you're dead, but now you came back. What's your life like now that you're on the other side, now that you have faced? And when everybody thinks, oh, my character died, they think it's such a terminal, you know, point to that character development. And I think in a world where resurrection is available, it shouldn't be a terminal point of character development. It should literally be like a revelatory one. So that's where we're at. So, all right. I've also run games where everybody in the I ran a tournament where everybody on one team in the tournament was undead. That was interesting and fun. That was a great concept to play with. So that's the buzz. All right. So, all right, buddies. All right, good friends of the internet. I am going to let you ponder these words of wisdom or these words of ill fortune and go out and kill some characters. Let's take a look at the calendar. So tonight, Gaurav Galati has time for games. I'm not sure exactly what he's playing, but you know what? You can tune in at 8:30 tonight and check that out. If you want to flip over to the G and the S, the Geek and the Sundry, the Bearded Men, will be doing their improv show at 4:30 today. I am not DMing that show. Timothy is down from Seattle, so he'll be sitting in and running the game for them. Tomorrow, Mr. Wes Otis hosts Call of Cthulhu Black Bag Vikings, running our Call of Cthulhu game set in, well, I'm not sure exactly what this city is, but I love the fact that he's taken Call of Cthulhu and pushed it into a sort of pseudo-medieval sort of setting. I am just absolutely enchanted with that idea. Saturday, Masks is back with Mr. Stephen Pope. It's a whole new generation of superheroes, so check that out. 5 o'clock, Mac Beauvais is sitting in the hot seat as the new head of Phoenix Dawn Command. The story continues. The characters continue. We got a whole new judge there, which is great. Sunday, you can catch us up on the YouTubes. So, what would you have available for you to watch? You could go back and watch last week's episode of Monday Night Dungeon Fight in preparation for this coming Monday's episode of Monday Night Dungeon Fight. You could go back to our actual play of Dusk City Outlaws from Tuesday night with Amy Vorpahl and Jordan Caves Callerman and and Gaurav Gulati was there, and Talene was there, so you could tune in for that. That was fun if you are interested. Oh, Sax is still GMing. When's Sax done, for crying out loud? Let's get Mac in here. This is what I get for having inside knowledge. Special. I'm trying to remember who's playing Monday Night Dungeon Fight on Monday. I usually don't think about that until, like, Friday afternoon. Oh, I laugh because it's true. No, we have some people lined up. I don't have it pulled up right in front of me right now. So I'm sorry that I can't tell you. So, all right. That's our calendar. That's our host of options for you. So, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please spread the word. Become a Twitch subscriber. It matters. Tell people about what you've seen and what you've learned here on the Saving Throw Show. We, as always, continue to try and grow our channel as much as possible, and we can't do that without you guys out there, beating the brush and telling people what a great experience that you have. So we have Tracy Talene and Colin Green so far on Monday. We got one more person to fill in. I think it's going to be kind of a Valentine's Day episode of Monday Night Dungeon Fight. So maybe I'll put in some ogres that are expressly there for smooching. I don't know. Those Valentine's Day games. That's a tough nut to handle, right? All right. So there we go. That's the buzz. Until next time, I'm Tom Lommel. This is Saving Throw Show, and let's dungeon. Yes, back in stride.